This presentation has been developed as a partnership between Student Support Services and the Engagement and Wellbeing Directorates within the Early Years and Child Development Division for Department for Education. Behaviour support coaches are encouraged to use this as a basis for promoting discussion with educators about the department's positive behaviour support approach, the research and evidence that underpins this approach, and the resources available to support schools in implementation. It is not intended to provide evidence to support funding requests. For example, if the behaviour is concerning or serious, it doesn't automatically become grounds for a request for funding through the IESP. The Behaviour Support Policy was introduced in July 2019 to replace the 2008 School Discipline Policy. It better reflects a growing body of research on what works well and what doesn't for student behaviour. Development of the Behaviour Support Policy commenced in 2018 through a series of co-design processes and extensive consultation with internal and external stakeholders. The Behaviour Support Policy endorses a positive behaviour support approach to children's behaviour in line with current evidence. According to the policy, all behaviours of concern by children and young people will receive a department response. The nature of the response will be equitable and reflects the child's needs and what is required to support positive and respectful behaviour in future. Exclusionary responses are used as a last resort. The behaviour support approach endorsed by the department derives from behaviour research over the past 25 years. This research has led to a dramatically reconfigured approach to assessment and intervention approaches to student behaviour in school settings. Over this period, we have come to understand all behaviour is communicative and not just behaviours of concern. Patterns of behaviour are learned, not inherent, and the environment influences behaviour. All behaviour is a form of communication. We need to ask ourselves, what is the child, student, or young person trying to tell us through their behaviour? Most of you will be familiar with the analogy of behaviour as an iceberg. The iceberg analogy helps us as educators to think about what's behind the behaviour or underneath the surface of the students we are educating. What we see at the tip of the iceberg is the behaviour we may hear, see or experience. The part of the iceberg under the surface may be what is happening on the inside for the child. Children who are not feeling safe, supported or valued may develop maladaptive ways of coping in their environment, and without support this can lead to behaviours of concern. Beliefs about student behaviour. You might have heard some misconceptions about student behaviour like, they just need tougher consequences. Rather than sharing these misconceptions, we've flipped this to show 7 beliefs that reflect a positive behaviour support approach. The positive behaviour support approach under the Behaviour Support Policy represents a shift away from more traditional behaviour management approaches. The visual here demonstrates a shift in thinking when it comes to student behaviour in school settings. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to spell, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to count, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we. Why can't we finish the last sentence as automatically as the others? South Australia's world-class education strategic plan outlines the need for our actions to be underpinned by the use of best evidence. Evidence shows the positive behaviour support approach supports students' learning. by 1. Increasing engagement, academic achievement and school attendance, and 2. Reducing behaviour errors and suspensions. Horner, Sagai, Scott and Barrett have shown the following in their evidence. A positive behaviour support approach is a preventative approach to behaviour management. Instructional time is increased because the number of teaching minutes spent dealing with students exhibiting behaviours of concern are ultimately reduced. And studies have shown that a single incident where a student is removed from the classroom can cost a teacher up to 20 minutes in instructional time, while the loss in instructional time is even greater for the student being removed. The Department's Behaviour Support Policy ensures effective, consistent and fair behaviour support for children and young people. The Behaviour Support Policy outlines that we each have a role to play in making sure our schools, preschools and care settings are safe, positive and inclusive environments. This involves addressing behaviours of concern when they occur and supporting those involved and affected by these behaviours. The policy requires schools to use strategies to achieve the 7 functions of behaviour support. Promote, model and support productive and positive behaviour. Explicitly teach positive behaviour and expectations about behaviour. Intervene by using the least exclusionary methods to prevent, reduce or redirect behaviours of concern. Work with children, their families, professionals and other key adults to understand the environmental, social and family context of a child or young person's behaviours of concern, and to use the capacity of these parties to support positive behaviour change. Provide visible, fair and equitable behavioural responses that foster confidence and trust. Repair and restore relationships that have been harmed by behaviours of concern, and establish safety and well-being for people involved in behavioural incidents and others. Departmental staff must create and maintain supportive and safe learning environments by modelling and promoting positive behaviour and explicitly teaching all children and young people about safe and inclusive behaviours. It's one thing to understand the principles of positive behaviour support. It's another thing to explore what that looks like in practice in the school and classroom setting. So the department also updated its resources to reflect the positive behaviour approach. And some of these include revision of the suspension, exclusion and expulsion of student procedure to ensure targeted use. Development of the Behaviour Support Toolkit to provide more support for schools to implement the core functions of the Behaviour Support Policy. And development of the Local Policy Implementation Tool to provide schools with policy templates. All government schools are required to either make a copy of the department's Behaviour Support Policy available on the school website or in a simplified form as enabled by the Local Policy Implementation Tool. All of these resources are available on EduPortal or the intranet. The procedure guides school leaders through the use of suspensions, exclusions and expulsions as required under the Education and Children's Services Act 2020. It is also known as the C procedures. It explains their targeted use as a strategy of last resort to support safe and positive behaviour in schools. Research supports using suspension as a last resort because school suspensions are linked to further negative behaviour. A 2014 study by Perry and Morris identified negative consequences from suspensions on the wider student population, that is, the non-suspended students. Higher rates of suspension were also associated with reduced scores in reading and maths for all students. A report by the Australian Institute of Criminology in 2017, reviewing research on the associations between school suspension and student problem behaviour, found students who were suspended often became alienated from school and were more likely to engage in criminal behaviours. It is important to recognise that often schools can be a protective factor for students who exhibit behaviours of concern, which is why we want to implement classroom practices that promote positive behaviour. An inquiry into suspension, exclusion and expulsion processes in South Australian government schools was released in 2020 by Professor Linda Graham and others. The report found that SA government schools are for the most part safe and orderly. Of the 177,246 students enrolled in 2019, only 3.3% of students were sent home, 5.8% were suspended, and 0.5% were excluded. Nevertheless, the report also found that take-home suspensions and exclusions are being used in a way that doesn't address the drivers of problem behaviours and at times likely reinforces it. Take-home suspensions and exclusions are used too frequently for inappropriate or minor reasons, such as not following instructions, minor physical acts, talking in class, or missing a class, finding 5.1. Primary school-age students, especially, are too regularly sent home, suspended or excluded for minor behaviours, some of which are influenced by developmental factors like maturity and self-regulation. For example, 30% of students were suspended for violations of school rules, such as non-compliance with reasonable instructions. In many of these circumstances, a behaviour support approach would involve identifying a number of other strategies for schools to use before using suspension as the last resort. The South Australian Government has committed $15 million to support a measurable reduction in the use of exclusionary discipline in line with the findings of the report over the next 4 years. Whilst the department supports an inclusive approach, it also does recognise that there are some occasions where principals will need to suspend, exclude or expel a student. The Behaviour Support Toolkit is a team around the child approach to working collaboratively to develop a comprehensive understanding of a child or young person's behaviour and to respond effectively to support positive behaviour change. It is not designed to be the be-all and end-all to behaviour support, but rather a basic introductory resource to complement the behaviour support policy and other school policies and plans to assist staff, students and families to engage in supportive conversations with a shared understanding and language and to work collaboratively on agreed strategies and solutions. You may have seen or maybe even used the Behaviour Support Toolkit already. It is a useful tool for conversation so that everyone consistently uses the language of positive behaviour support, including parents, students and staff. In the beginning of the Behaviour Support Toolkit, there is a diagram about the purpose of behaviour. All behaviour, good or bad, is communication and serves a purpose for the child or young person. Section 1 of the Behaviour Support Toolkit assists schools to understand what might be driving the behaviour, if the child is seeking or avoiding something, and is that happening in an internal or external way. Children's behaviour can be a sign that they are not coping in the environment, and the behaviour is their body's attempt to restore balance, because the child might not know what else to do, and they may not even be aware of it. The toolkit has identified 12 categories of behaviour developed by the Fraser Mustard Centre. You'll recognise these. Yep. Each category has an explanation of what it looks like and underlying factors that can be reinforcing to the behaviour. Part 3 of the toolkit is the Behaviour Matrix. The toolkit helps us to take a developmental approach to understanding children and young people's behaviour. A traffic light system is used to identify whether the behaviour is developmentally appropriate, green, requiring universal school and classroom-wide strategies, or is more concerning, amber, or serious, red, requiring a more targeted or intensive intervention and specialised support. Part 4 of the toolkit looks at behaviour strategies. This section includes examples of classroom strategies, teacher practice, and differentiated curriculum that support positive behaviour. The strategies recognise that behaviour and therefore the interventions occur across a continuum. The positive behaviour support approach is evident in the behaviour strategies suggested in the Behaviour Support Toolkit. Behaviours of concern are often supported by the environment. By redesigning our teaching environments and practice, we can have far greater impact on positive change in student behaviour. These 8 classroom practices have been identified in the research as particularly effective and are always highlighted in any formal positive behaviour intervention and support training, or PBIS training, due to their evidence base. These are listed in this slide and also incorporated into the strategies suggested in the toolkit. By way of example, we can consider what environmental modifications might align with each practice. For example, number 1, classroom expectations can be displayed on posters, we can have a morning greeting, or as part of our regular classroom procedure or routine, we might configure the classroom in a way that allows teachers to actively supervise students. Part 5, the checklist, provides items for consideration to ensure consistency and completeness in developing responses to behaviours of concern. Part 6 is the additional resource section, and resources are used in the development of the toolkit, are included along with sources for further information. Accessing the Behaviour Support Toolkit. The toolkit was sent to all schools, preschools and children's centres at the end of last year. You might have already seen it, but you can also print further A4 copies from the intranet and access videos that demonstrate how schools are using the toolkit. You can also borrow a copy of the toolkit from Siru. After this presentation, you might like to access the YouTube link provided here. It is also provided in your resources section. In doing so, you might like to consider what are the behaviours using the behaviour categories and the function of behaviour using the internal, external, seeking, avoiding matrix. Make a list of 3 effective strategies you might use to assist Hannah using the Behaviour Support Toolkit. An example is, you might seat Hannah closer to the teacher in class, you might develop a risk and safety plan, provide her with frequent breaks, or pre-teach social and emotional literacy skills. Each school is required to make the department's behaviour support policy available on their website or develop its own local simplified version. Some schools develop a behaviour support policy which provides general guidance and a separate behaviour code or school rules that set out more specific expectations and consequences. Some schools develop a behaviour support policy that combines general guidance with specific behaviour support procedures in one single document. While the department's intranet guidance refers to schools developing both a behaviour support policy and a behaviour code, some schools prefer to combine both. The department does not recommend whether a school should develop one document or more than one. This is at the discretion of each individual school. The local policy implementation tool allows schools to customise the policy template to develop their own version online. The benefit of the tool is that it allows schools to create a behaviour support policy that is quick and easy to create, best practice and evidence-based, easy to share with the whole community, consistent with other schools, and in line with the department policy. There is no prescriptive process for consulting on your school's behaviour support policy, but it is recommended that schools consult with teachers, students, governing council and the wider school community. The tool allows schools to customise a simple version of the department's behaviour support policy. School leaders can access the tool via the Edu portal or via the intranet, and consultation provides an opportunity for the whole school community to understand the behaviour approach and feel part of it. You can access each of the resources via the Edu portal or via the intranet that have been discussed in today's presentation.